All right, so we're back with Luke. Luke is kind of the sense-making center of gravity of my podcast as well as many others. And as to the reasons why that is, I'm not quite sure. I think we're all pondering that, pondering the centrality of Luke within this nexus, this multi focal nexus, if that is even an intelligible combination of words.
Yeah, we should talk about that. Why I'm so central.
Right. I think that's what the fans want. I
The
think that's
fan.
what I think that's what they've been waiting for. Um,
Mm.
no, I've been going through a lot of stuff. Um, yeah, and I've told you, and a lot of it has centered around anxiety about my son, my only child. Um, uh, he has developmental delays, and it does make me worry about autism. And I went down the research rabbit hole on that, even though I had already gone down it once or twice. And then just, I mean, so many sort of life things, and really the I won't say the shaking of my faith, but very much a grief observed type. um I don't know, sort of non-dualism or letting go about a lot of it. That's really where I've been at. Um, and how about yourself? Is there any news on the?
Um, I've not been having a lot of existential struggles so much in that regard. It's more of like a things that I think about other than broad esotericism and just practical things are the it's related to bigger topics that we talk a lot about with estuary and community and church and the modern world. My wife read the book Bowling Alone a while ago, and so we just talk about the increasing kind of atomization of the world and people relationally, and then how this online community relates to that because I first kind of got into the online sphere. I'm not a big social media person with Twitter probably, I don't know, 10 years ago, and I'm not on it anymore. And I got on it to almost as just like it's similar to actually how I use my YouTube channel now, just to talk about ideas and just throw out kind of it's just it's a diary. It's like a thought diary for me more than anything. And then I figured if people interacted with it, it'd be cool. And then I actually developed some legit relationships that manifested into in real life community and have led to ongoing relationships. And then this whole thing happened with this little corner of the internet, YouTube, and how I've met you. And now I would say just kind of significantly, I interact with my online friends much more than I interact with in real life friends. And part of that's just ease and convenience of technology, but also part of it
Is a symptom of the disease and the atomization of the world, right?
it's a little bit of
Think
that
think
because
about the nuclear family.
yeah, right. But then Karen Wong, I don't know, Sam said this in our original randos conversation, and then Karen Wong just said this in her conversation with Grim Grizz, who um I don't know how well you know either of those. I mean, a little bit. No,
Tangentially, they're both very impressive, interesting people.
yeah. So I know Karen and really appreciate Karen, and she said, "What is?" Because they were talking about Grimm's story, and they were saying what becomes hard about this little corner is you have, especially the further you go into it, you have all these very complex, esoteric, nuanced conversations that kind of develop their own vocabulary about all this stuff. And the reality is that for those that are so inclined to talk about this stuff philosophically or theologically, people that like to talk about ideas, it is, I mean, I would just say it's impossible to reproduce the, I don't even know, quality is not the right word, because it's debatable whether or not it's quality, but in the biggest sense, but like the kind of technical specificity, and I don't know, like maybe it's like a divination of fun thing, like Burn Power was saying. Like, as fun as the conversations are, like the kind of conversations I can have with you, I cannot have with anyone in my real life, at all. And so so then this gets into even like the judgment thing, and it's related even to like what you're struggling with, I think, with your son. Is that good? Is it bad?
Right. One of the clearest things that I got, and the thing is, judgment, putting words in God's mouth. I'm aware that a lot of the things that, I say I was praying about it, and it's as if God told me. And I know that, God doesn't, he didn't say it in those words. And I know that sometimes it's what I attribute to God. It's like my highest understanding. But God told me, it's like I gave you a gift, and it was never for you to be the judge, whether it was good enough or not, whether he's good enough or not, in any way, shape, or form. That was very, I mean, it's very deep. But you're talking about the internet just sort of letting you find like-minded people, and how, I mean, like you talk about hitting the wall in your conversation with Jess and Sherry, and when that's just about is about the unity of opposites. Everything is multifaceted. Everything, it's like, Niels Bohr said that if something is a really profound truth, then its opposite is also true. And that's definitely a part of it, that, and I guess you could call that non-duality, or the non-duality, duality and non-duality, or some BS like that. But it's what it is, because the infinite is infinitely open-ended, and it's like writing on water. Whatever you say of it is instantly negated or transcended in the next breath. It's like, to know the limit as a limit is already to be beyond the limit. And it's that kind of reality, open-endedly, constructively, transfinitely writing itself, but in a way that involves self-awareness. Once you can articulate the problem, the solution comes quickly. As soon as you give it language, the landscape transforms. But then we're sort of at a new meta level in that landscape. That's what the sense making on the internet is about. And granted, yeah, it's addictive. Sometimes spending too long in it is itself a kind of autism, of losing the forest for the trees, right? And and autism, I'm speaking of it not from a place of judgment of, say, neurodivergence or neurodiversity, which is a whole topic in and of itself, but I'm speaking of it as a kind of, in a way, like the paradigm of sin itself, where Augustine characterized it as incurvatus in se, I'm caved in upon myself. I choose always the known over the unknown, choose the self or the other, choose my perception of life over my perception of death, when really those are inverted. What seems like life to me is death, and what seems like death to me is life. And you talk about like the atomization of the world. Like, my mind has gone there in desperation, trying to account for the rise in autism, which seems very much like a disease of modernity, which has increased in its real prevalence. But it doesn't seem like the factors that have been, put forward really account for it, like vaccines, or what is, just toxins in the environment. Yeah, maybe. But, one wonders whether or not it's an expression of something else, something that's going on at a level above the epigenetic, like the meta epigenetic, the level of like assortative mating, but more than that, the level at which society, influences the decisions of people in how they raise their family, and who they, sort of, cohabitate with. It just goes on and on, up and up levels of complexity. in the code kind of thing. I don't know.
I just had this idea, and I don't know, it feels related to me, but allergies are also going up. Like I'm someone who grew up with allergies. I grew up on a cattle ranch, being allergic to, you know, like cattle and hay and grass and such. And that's kind of how we found out. Me and my brother were like playing around in this big loose uh pile of hay, and I think we fell asleep or something. And then I woke up and was just a wreck. And by the time I walked back up to my grandma's house, I was just like, my eyes were swelling and I was just about having, and it's always been, I also have asthma, which is what's made it hard. Just couldn't breathe basically. But, and my kids, I have, one of my kids has some food allergies, and we're doing oral immunotherapy actually, which has been
Right.
helping him. And I've been doing allergy shots, but it gets into a little bit of the, even a broader, I've often thought of allergies in relation to like a hygiene hypothesis, but I think I often think of these terms in terms of morphic fields. It's almost as if allergies are to food or your environment as autism is to attention or
No,
something.
that, I mean, and it's totally related to attention deficit disorder and allergies. All these, they overlap with autism. And you know, the interesting thing about mental, or about, let's just say, broad, neutrally, more neutrally, just psychiatric conditions, you would think that some of them are negatively related in prevalence, um, based because they seem like conceptual opposites. Let's consider, say, schizophrenia and autism, for example. One seems like a condition of seeing too many connections, making false positive errors, and the other is like seeing too many distinctions, missing connections, is like false negative errors. But like epidemiologically, so conceptually they're opposite, but epidemiologically they're related.
Mhm.
All mental illnesses, or sorry, just psychiatric conditions more neutrally, um, are correlated with each other. You know, and that's why when I was speaking to mental health professionals, and I was actually much less functional and much more neurotic and troubled, you know, they told me, like, I think you got like 5 different things. It was like autism, ADHD, narcolepsy, schizotypal personality disorder, and OCD. It's like, you know, it felt like they were just getting started. Um, and but there is something, I don't know what it is. It is like almost a I don't know what it is. The gene pool rejecting the matrix in which it was formed, and maybe that's because there are a lot of children surviving into adulthood that before it used to not be like that. You have a compromised immune system, you're gone. You're born premature, you're gone. So is your mom. You know, like, you know, there's no C-section. They're the, you know, the child and the mother are both gone. And you know, sort of with technology, we've wrested these hard cases away from the jaws of an early death. But has that had some effect on our gene pool? Probably.
So, okay, what comes to mind? I mean, I wasn't planning on going here at all, but
Neither was I.
a topic. Well, I'm gonna take it. I think it's related, but I'm gonna take it a different way. So, it could be, it's related, but it's also some silliness. So there's my wife and I. Not that this is for us, but just a related relationship in our life has been doing some pregnancy things, and through our life, through having kids and whatever, we've known a lot of different people with infertility issues, and so we know some people that are going through some fertility stuff that is, I mean, I think it's essentially in vitro, you know, where you're harvesting eggs, fertilizing them, reimplanting them, all that stuff. And it really, Gabriel Marsal, who I love, is this French 20th century thinker. He's most clearly probably known for being he's an anti-systematic thinker. And so it's hard to categorize his thinking. And I'm just like, I love you, because that's the
Yeah,
kind of
I
thinker.
mean, increasingly, that's just where I'm at.
And he wrote one of his, it was a lecture, but I have it in a book of mine. It's just like a collection of these different books or essays or speeches or essays. I think it's called Technology in the Age of this, or no, The Sacral in the Age of Technology. And the main illustration he uses is um, birth control and technology and related to fertility and just and getting involved in that. But I think it speaks to your point of how technology affects all this stuff. It actually, to me, is part of my broader idea of technological babble, is that one of the components to it is this increasing individualization and atomization that technology affords and almost is necessary with it. Like, I don't know if there's a further up and further in place where that comes back around. I'm open to that possibility, but like, for, let's say, this is where I want to go with it, is the fertility thing. Is I watched this, I've brought him up a few times. I've listened to 2 podcasts with this guy who's he's kind of an internet phenomenon person, at least in certain realms. And he's becoming bigger on YouTube, but he's called the Liver King, which I don't know if I've talked to you about him.
I'm familiar with the Liver King.
Okay. And I find him fascinating. So his basic idea, he's this super jacked guy, and his whole
Right.
shtick is these
1 pound raw liver a day.
yeah, his is these 9 ancestral tenets,
Mm.
which he just talks about. It's basically to like reach your fullest potential and be like the human being that you're essentially supposed to do. Because I would say, in a way, he's almost doing a little bit of a Wim Hof thing of like, where we have divorced ourselves in our humanity from what we are intended to be, in such a way that like we're basically moving toward like these Wall-E creatures, rather than what we mean to be. And he's like this extreme jacked version of it that's just like eating organ meats raw and just like doing tons of weightlifting. But a lot of the things that he does talks about stuff that I think is really legitimate. Like, he has Faraday curtains in his house, like no cell phones in his house, no Wi-Fi in his house. He walks barefoot every day, connects to the ground. I mean, there's like resonance that you have while walking through a forest. That's actually one of the ways they treat autism. It's just like getting kids out in a forest. And
Yeah.
so he's talking a lot in ways, which is very Wim Hof stuff, which I'm also into, is that cold is one of his ancestral tenets, and so he's like diet, sleep, cold. It's reconnecting to, I mean, you could even say in a broad kind of esoteric way of like divine Sophia, the earth, your mother. We're disconnected from the mother.
Yeah.
And so I
There's so
think
much
a
there.
lot of that's related.
One of the things I want to just clear up real fast, because I know a lot of people, there's a basic sort of babble type confusion that's occurring just with the word autism now, which is, it's like the medical model versus neurodivergence, and it's something of a false dichotomy. So like the idea is like, is this something that's a disease, or is this something that's just a difference that we should accept and affirm? And there's a form of therapy called ABA therapy, which is kind of, it's very much like applied behavioral analysis. It's like BF Skinner, like rats and reinforcement, that whole old lineage, which is itself very kind of, if you will, satanic, where it's a feature of that that epigenetic structure you were talking about, that's building a Babel tower. But these Babel towers, they lack being, right? Just ontologically, they always have to fall. And I think that they sort of fall under their own weight, rather than it being a thing where God stretches out his hand to knock it down. I don't think he has to. But ABA works well with autism, because it's about providing reinforcement and reward for individuals who don't experience a lot of reward for social interaction. And but then you've got people on Reddit who say, well, I have autism, and I didn't like ABA therapy, or it was even somewhat traumatic for me when I was a child and I was subjected to it. And therefore, if you have a child, and you're doing ABA therapy with them, you shouldn't, and you're a monster. But what they're not seeing is that that word autism embraces such a range of, there's no other word than functionality. because it's the ability to express yourself and have degrees of freedom in a society where you have to be able to explain yourself. What do you want? What do you need? What are you trying to do? You know, there's basically the autism version of autism and the non-autism version of autism almost. And it's like what these people don't understand is that for a lot of the parents they're lecturing, if they could know with certainty that their child would one day be able to get on a computer and lecture them about something, that would be a good problem. And so the thing is, we have one word that's talking about such a something where if it's like uh, a highly verbal person who may or may not be able to hold down a job, but can explain themselves, and it's like at that point we're looking at more, maybe we're looking at a difference. But if we're talking about someone who their parents don't know what's going to happen to them when they're gone because they can't take care of themselves, that's a difference.
Yeah.
And I don't much care for the word autism when it can embrace such a wide range of functional profiles, because then it's effectively meaningless.
Right.
It's going to sound like we're talking about but I'm saying this because some people are going to think of us as pathologizing autism and talking about it as being something which benefits from woo-woo new age cures like walking in the forest. I'm not talking about curing autism. I'm talking about alleviating some of the most significant symptoms, or maybe things that aren't even autism, but are just like related sensitivities and issues that people with autism tend to have, or autistic people. And see, already that word is skunked. You can't, it's like that's the scatterer right there. It's like, you see the influence, if you will, the diabolic influence on language, where it's just causing little landmine explosions every time you use a word.
Well, that's,
is it
yeah,
autistic people or people with autism, etc.?
right. I mean, you gotta save the appearances, or else you can't even have a conversation. I mean, like, if everyone is gonna, every time a certain word just shuts you down and inhibits listening, then we're just, then it's like all it is billiard balls hitting each other, and there's never going to be any sort of reciprocity. I don't see, and that's what's funny is, like, everything that you just said, you're anticipating that, and I'm sure it will happen. I mean, that always happens with people, but like, I'm so, what that makes me think of is I'm just so not in that world, that it's kind of like when I was talking with Dave the other day in our little group, and he said, I've thought about this a bunch, where he told me, he said, yeah, it's just your use of English is so weird. Like, you use English in a way that is unlike anyone I've ever met. He said, other than probably his mom or something, which he said he can understand me more than language. Well, this makes me even think on the spectrum of autism, because you could look at somebody like me who's obviously fairly
You're neurodivergent, if nothing else.
fairly loquacious, right? Like, I talk a lot. I don't think anyone would. It's funny because, like, that would you categorize me, would one that knows me well categorize me as someone who is unable to articulate themselves well? Well, kinda.
I mean, no. The answer to that is simply no, because it's failing to take into account the ambition of what you're trying to say, and the fact that most people never attempt to get their minds around phenomena as broad as the things that you spend a lot of time thinking about, talking about.
Yeah, and so I guess part of what I'm trying to get at in that is that all of us, how to say this, all of us are and are not somewhat trapped in our own consciousness. I don't know, and maybe this is just callous to say in comparing it to autism, but like, there's some degree, I don't know. I don't know if this is relatable. I'm trying to work out a thought, but like, my family and I watched for family movie night a while ago. Oh, what the hell is that movie with Robert De Niro and Robin Williams? It's from maybe like the 80s or even 90 Awakenings. Have you seen this
Hmm.
movie?
No, unfortunately.
Um, that'd be a good one for you to watch. But there's a disease. I almost want to look up what it is that they don't understand, and it's undiagnosed, but it's basically about this movie with Robin Williams plays a doctor. I believe he's a neurologist. So it's a 1990 American drama film based on Oliver Sacks' 1973 memoir of the same name. It tells the story of a fictional character, neurologist Dr. Malcolm Sayer, who's based on Sacks and played by Robin Williams. So he like works on this beneficial effects of the drugs L-DOPA to a bunch of catatonic patients who survived the 1917 through 1928 epidemic of encephalitis lethargica. And so it's basically all these patients who have been like for decades, they're basically to varying degrees of catatonic and unresponsive. But then all of a sudden, he just starts working with this guy and he notices that I think he throws him a ball and he notices that like although they're just like seemingly unaware of what's going on, they have this reaction to it where they can catch the ball. And so he, for whatever reason, he starts giving them just different doses of L-DOPA, and all of a sudden, um, like one of them in particular, they like come awake, and it's like they become real fuller human beings again, and they start talking and interacting and doing all this stuff. But then what's really odd is all of a sudden like it loses its efficacy and they like fall back into this like trapped in their body, kind of a prison thing. And um and I guess what I'm kind of saying is like whether or not autism is that, what exactly is going on with autism, I think.
Sometimes it's like that. And that's very, very difficult to account for in the simple neurodivergence model of autism. Well, and most forms of the disease model for that matter, because it's like a child who was formerly not integrated, whom you had to teach skills to in isolation, through like reward and reinforcement and discrete trials where you're isolating that particular skill. It's very unusual, to say the least, way of learning and forming a person. But these people sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes they just quote unquote come out of autism, and suddenly like they're an integrated person who is able to draw on all those skills in different situations as the situation requires, and they're able to give an account of themselves, explain themselves, and also to some extent explain, this happens with other individuals in different ways. A lot of the nonverbal ones stay like they never express themselves orally, but they will have things like a keyboard or a letter board. They find it easier to just spell out words letter by letter, and they're very articulate and they explain themselves, why they do the things they do, and it's clear that they understand other people's perspectives. They have a wide range of emotions, even though that's not what you would guess about them, just based on observation using the
Right.
standards that we apply to most people. And that's kind of like what I was telling you about in terms of what you might call the Jod Bharat effect. Well, I was raised to Hare Krishna, and we have the story of Jod Bharat, who is to all appearances deaf and dumb, to such an extent that he was hauled off by Kali worshippers. Kali is the goddess with many arms and maybe many heads. I'm not sure. She has a taste for human blood, and she delights in human sacrifice, but not of pure, exalted, elevated souls, even when those souls give no indication of, being so. And anyway, so Jod Bharat's kind of sitting out there, deaf and dumb and mute in the field, and the Kali worshippers come along, and it's like, hey, you have good teeth. You look like a healthy animal, basically. Let's sacrifice you. That does not please Kali at all. So she kills all the worshippers, which is like not very nice, because they didn't even, at least, at a minimum, they didn't know. But then again, she's Kali. She's not very nice.
Mhm.
And Jod Bharat, so he escapes that. And then the king, he's coming down in his palanquin. He's being borne by his servants, and one of them, gets gets a knee injury or something, and so they have to find somebody else, and they see John Barrett is like, hey, you have good teeth, you're like a healthy young draft animal. They always say you look like a donkey. You remind me of a donkey, with those big strong teeth. And so they have him bearing, one of the uh, arms of the palanquin, but the palanquin is rocking, and the king's like, "What's going on?" And it said, "Sire, it appears that the new carrier doesn't want to step on any ants." He's like, "What is this about not stepping on ants? I'm the king. If you think that ants are worth more than the king's comfort, you've got a problem." And it keeps happening. So he says, "Give me my stick. I'm going to teach this new servant a lesson." And John Barrett suddenly just explains that in a previous life, he was himself a king who was unable to attain liberation due to his sort of last minute attachment to a baby deer. Um, and when he was in his ashram, having supposedly renounced the world, he became attached to a baby deer which survived a forest fire. And then his last thoughts were of that deer. And in the Vedanta system, whatever your mind is focused on in your last moments, that's where you go. So his life after kinghood was as a deer, and then having being determined never to take birth in the world again. He determined to just never speak, never interact with the world, and until he found it necessary to give him an account of himself to the king. But it's like I told you in that sort of irreproducible 6-minute signal message that I sent you that the, the idea of like either in this life or the next, like either judging or being judged by really your child with autism, and seeing them give an account of themselves is it's like how is this possible, and what such person ever even existed, kind of thing. It's mystifying to say the least. But anyway, it always makes me think of Jod Barrett. It always makes me think of that story. But that's just probably, it's for me, it's just a private reference that my mind always goes to. But unless I explain, and even then, you know, other people will not they won't see it. They won't see reality in those terms, and they won't see it as such a rich metaphor. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean they to some degree they can't. So you would say the takeaway from that illustration, that story, is that you're wondering about your child theoretically. I mean, let's
Yeah,
just
my child, it's anybody's guess. You can never guess. It's very difficult to correlate like their level of function and their behavior when they're very young with like their ultimate level. It's maybe easier around age 5 or 6, but but no, but like just as a theoretical possibility that you would raise a child who was um sort of almost like, it does make me think of Humpty Dumpty. I know I sound dangerously, it's like sort of tangential or incoherent to some people, but the idea that you have a person who is so not integrated that it's as if you have the pieces of a person, and you're meant to fit those pieces together situationally the way they should, do everything for them, externally, because they don't have a capacity to recognize themselves, or if they do, they're not acting on it, what situation they're in and which way they should behave. You are the, if you like, the the control system, for this person. And it's like you're splitting all the functions and actions of personhood, you know into different situations, and you're teaching things always in this very like piecewise and isolated fashion, guiding things in that kind of way.
well, and I think no matter what, you're kind of doing that. This is the
Mhm.
this is the I think this is one of the reasons I'm confusing to people, because even in you saying that and describing it as Humpty Dumpty, because my main obsession is vision and talking about vision and how people see. And I've been talking a lot recently about how we just see holes. And so a couple things. This says our time might run out in 3:36. So if it does, whatever, we'll start again. But what it makes me think of, and this is why often I think I talk about not judging, or I don't overly get worried about things, even though I mean, I do at some levels, but I'm talking like this theoretical abstract level is, and even in judgment or with your son or anything, there's a few things going on. So a piece I want to bring in is, you know, the question of the man born blind to Jesus, and he's like, and you know, they're essentially saying like, what's going on with this person that is incomplete or that is broken or that is something, and Jesus' responses to that is basically like, wrong question, wrong framing.
Neither.
That's not what's going on here.
Right.
And I think when you get in that mode, what that makes me think of, and what I think Jesus is getting at there, and often what I'm trying to see, or the way that I see is what I
Right.
often talk about riffing on Rob Bell, is the thing behind the thing behind the thing. And then it's the wholeness that is behind whatever deficiency or lack.
No, that's right. And the devil is so convincing, right? Because, well, or at least he is to me. It's like what seems like life to me is death, and vice versa. Um, and you know, the lie of the devil, and a lot of people, a lot of parents of children with, let's say, severe autism experience this. They feel like they're losing their child when the child regresses into autism. You know, and the devil's lie is something like, you've lost your son, or you never had a son. You know, whereas the truth is that, you know, you have a son, and your son is in some sense already whole now. And it also follows that he'll stand in judgment over you one day, you know, based on how how you parented. You know, that's the John Barrett thing. It's like, John Barrett judging the king.
Because there's
um
always there's degrees to this with everything. Like you think about, so whatever, I'll think about my kids that have no like
yes, there's degrees.
autism or anything.
Right.
Anytime there was conflict and frustration with them, or ongoing difficulty, there's some degree, what it makes me think of is there's some degree of expectation, and then there's some deficiency from that expectation that is not met, even if it be
Right.
relationally
Right.
or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
And then that brings about this narrative that you tell yourself. It makes me think of the green lady from Paralandra, of like the expectant good versus the real good. And when she's just amazed at Ransom to say like, oh, you have this capacity to hold on to this expectant good rather than the real good that God has brought you. And she's just like, oh, I had never thought of that, of even that capacity to do that. But that's what we do with anything, you know, like anytime anyone sends, this is why Sherry's always going on and on about trying to fix things. Or when I bring up love, you know,
No, that's right. That's
love
right.
isn't what you can, you know, you cannot control what you love, quoting Graham Greene. There's a way that we kick against the goad.
Kicking against the goads.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I'll restore the broken image of God by making you more in my image. I'll fix you by making you more like me, as opposed to.
Yeah. And I think this gets into Job and stuff that we always talk about, you know, why is this happening to me? What's going on? And it makes me think of too, I read Lewis's book, Till We Have Faces, which apparently he thought was his best book, um, earlier this year or last year or something. And that's basically it's a brilliant work. But it's basically and without giving it away, I mean, what's really going on? It's a book that's basically like, you don't. I mean, how would I summarize that last book? I mean, it's all in the title. Till We Have Faces is an
It's
icon
two
for what the
two
whole book
girls
is.
that are like almost two facets of Lewis own psyche. Like one is the intuitive and the other is the kind of modern divided man.
Well, that's part of it, yeah, and it's a riff on, I mean, it's a play on Uriel and Psyche. It is this play on these ancient myths, you know, and so and in a sense, they kind of are the same person. But one of them is this person with an imagination that's almost like a kind of radical empiricism, like we've been talking about recently. Like a radical empiricism would be the Green Lady, you know, of just like, oh, this is just what happened. Fine. You know, it's the opposite of a kind of scientism that seeks to,
Yeah, it's a kind of Buddhism. And it's just accepting.
yeah,
And
exactly. So it's not like I heard, and I don't know, I'd love to put this in the chat if we can, but this Farisa Hobby, who's a MMA coach who I really like, he trained, um, uh, what's the guy's name? The most famous MMA fighter of all time.
mm,
Uh, French Canadian guy, whatever, who cares? But he was his trainer forever. And it'll pop in my head all of a sudden. But he's brilliant. He does MMA. That's what he does all the time. But he's basically a philosopher. What he likes to think about all the time is philosophy. He's a Muslim guy, and he was on Rogan once. It's one of my favorite Rogan clips because he tried to take Rogan to a place that Rogan never goes, and where I would always like to see Rogan go, which is they basically have this 40. It's a 45-minute clip. You can find it on YouTube, where it's just like a subsection of their talk, because Rogan loves this guy, really respects him, and they just debate scientific truth. And he basically walks him through this thing, which would be radical empiricism. And he's trying to explain to him that science, he's really trying to get at like what is truth, and that science just doesn't give you this objective view of reality. Because he's saying, you know, like someone who had never seen a coin flip before, you know, he said, and all of a sudden, like if somebody flipped a coin and it just turned into a butterfly, he said that only surprises you if you're a scientist. If you're a radical empiricist, it doesn't surprise you. You're just like, oh, that's cool. And then if you do it a bunch, you do it. And he's trying to explain that science is the faith that the future is going to behave like the past. And it's mapping that, it's trusting in your map of this understanding. But a radical empiricist wouldn't do that. They would just be like, oh, this is what it is. It is not, it's not good or bad. I mean, I almost want to take that in a moral way, because this is Jesus and the story of the man born blind. He's just like, people are trying to ask, or Job's friends are trying to ask, or Job's wife is trying to ask, you know, what was the cause and effect? Like, what was the moral thing that happened, that this bad thing happened? Which is like the opposite of the Chinese farmer too. And Jesus is like, no, you do not have a face, to bring it full back to C.S. Lewis in the book Till We Have Faces. You do not yet understand. You do not yet have a face for God to talk to, essentially.
Okay, wow. Okay, perfect. Amazing. So the thing is, I wrote 2 pages of notes on, I don't know if I can ever bring myself to do this, but I remain fascinated and absorbed by the case of Adam Lanza.
Yes.
And that's all about judgment. Is that
Yes.
Adam Lanza sets himself up as the judge of being. And what happens in the aftermath of that is we set ourselves up as the judge of Adam Lanza, and we say that you, or that he was just a such and such, or he had these diagnoses that kind of, they never really explain everything, anything. Like the thing is, like any proof, it's always any proof, like, or explanation, it's always subject to this like Zeno's paradox type thing, where the crucial last step always like has to be subdivided further. But wait, explain this, explain this, explain this, and it's like you never actually like close that distance and get an explanation. You know, that we slap labels on it. Oh well, he had major depressive disorder, and an autism spectrum disorder, and maybe like schizotypal personality disorder, or the prodromal phase of schizophrenia. It's like, great. Actually, I think I have all those things too. What does that explain? Or I had them probably at the same age as Adam Lanza. But whatever, it's just pointing out it's a non-explanation, and we're sort of satisfied. Like our whole media machine, it's full of diseased, lame, non-explanation. And it's the case of Adam Lanza is like it's really a question. It's like Nate always talks about a person being structurally infinite. If a person is structurally infinite, you can never say, well, a person is just this or
Yeah.
that. And the case is never closed. You know, Pacey, a title like The Reckoning for Andrew Solomon's amazing New Yorker or New York Times piece on Adam Lanza and his interview of Adam Lanza's father. There's not a reckoning. It remains open. Reality is never closed. Reality always it remains, like transfinitely open-ended, constructively open-ended. Like um and so the thing is like, but if you're gonna set yourself up, say, as like the redeemer of Adam Lanza, that there's this part in the Gospels that my mind is always going back to, that, and I never remember it. And I think I'm probably misremembering it or mischaracterizing it. But it's like they
Doesn't.
asked Jesus if they can drink from the cup that he will drink from, or if they can sit on his left and his right. Jesus says no. But then he also says, you will drink from the cup
Yep.
that I will drink from. So in other words, no, but yes, but not on your term, not on the terms or in the way that you thought it would be.
Right.
You will speak for him someday, but you don't currently, you don't have a face to do that. But at the same time, it's like you will be called into it. And at that time, you may be asked, that you stretch out your hand, they take you a place that you don't want to go, kind of thing. Jesus to Peter, it's very, very much like that. But yeah, like, because I just remain so like how to put it, it doesn't go away, it doesn't get explained and get resolved and go away. And I myself, I don't get bigger as I get older, I get smaller. I don't have more answers, I have fewer, kind of thing. Yeah. So
Or it's wisdom. You're the knowledge, the know-it-all-ness of a lot of people's teens and 20s and whatever, or that, unfortunately some people, the falling off of the peak of Mount
smart sixth graders.
Huh?
Smart sixth graders.
Right. Or smart dumb people or whatever. People that have accumulated all of these static information.
I like smart sixth graders because it's the way the system teaches you to think. And it's like all the mouthpieces of the system, they think in this very predictable way.
Yes, but it's you never get out of. I was really big into classical education for a while, but that's the trivium, where it's the grammar, the logic, and the rhetoric. The goal is to go to the poetic and the beautiful, which transcends the logic. I mean, it incorporates it, but it's a further up and a further in. And so, like, if you never get to that, it's a world of quantity. You never get to that realm of quality, or even within that Wolfgang Smith cosmic icon, you're just on the outside, man. Like you're not.
But you're always on the outside. You're always
in the middle.
Circling.
Right. And
it's the mandala.
So and the thing is you can't, I suppose this gets into like the really deep esoteric things of mysticism, or even, are you still there?
I'm here.
So my screen just went, because I think our last recording just like got done, and so my screen just went weird. But like the idea of this thing came up in the Meditations of the Tarot, there this quote, but Tom Berg apparently has this line where he's just like, no one can compete with the Hermeticist because the Hermeticist doesn't compete. Which is a line that I love, because I was talking to Joey a while ago about that too. And this is what will come up a lot when I critique confessionalism or propositionalism or talk about non-dualism. And then people like go into their logic mode of just being like, well, when you set up an anti-dogma, that becomes a dogma. And like all these like Christian rationalist ticks that they
duality have. Duality and non-duality or whatever.
And I just think like, at some point that used to really bother me, because I do think I am seeing this thing behind a thing that is a different, like it's the matrix behind dualisms that like I can't reduce to you, because if I reduce it to you in a dualistic mode, you're gonna not see it.
But I think that if in that moment to really participate in it and say yes, what you would do is, okay, since, and not with irony, if you can manage it. It's like, since you are positioning yourself as someone who knows, since you know, let me ask you questions. And with each question has to be good faith and
Yeah,
presupposing a steel manned version,
right.
just and that's, I guess that's pretty Socratic.
Yes, but
Um,
it's also the hermeticist, because you're not, if you can stay in the mode of not doing it condescendingly or ironically
yes,
or polemically
yes,
or rhetorically, if you can
right,
stay out of that mode, then you're not, then you're no longer, you cannot compete against me because I'm not competing.
right.
You know,
That's
I'm
right.
not doing that. And I'm not just saying this is, and that's the dishonest postmodernist that I would critique, the mofo pomo of like, if you say you're not competing, but you're really competing, like that's the new competition. And you're just like, oh,
Mhm.
you're competing, I'm not competing. Well, no, no, like you got to stop all of that. But this gets into the very
Exactly.
esoteric Christian things of trampling down death by death. I think,
Yes. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight.
right. And it's not that. And this is why I think you cannot, this is why Jesus Christ was the true, this is what Father Bear is
Right.
saying when he's,
Right.
behold the human being, and the first truly human person
Wow.
is because
Yeah.
he's not, he is not holding on to anything. He's not counting equality with God something to be grasped.
Yes.
He's not even trying to, this came up recently. God, I don't know how to talk about it. There's too many things, but it's like in the Name of the Rose, it was quoting, which is a book that's way too, it's way too smart for me. I mean, in some sense, because like it's got all this technical specificity that like I just
I
can't.
was I was trying to read it and I was like, this book is too smart for me.
It is. It's like, I mean, you have to let it. You have to just let a lot of that go, because if you're trying to follow all that stuff, you're not going to be able to. Like it's too technical and too brilliant. But
Yeah,
they both,
reality, same way. Same way with just life. It-
yeah, and then almost if you let it go, then you can start to see again
exactly.
the thing behind the thing. Like all of
Yes.
that just goes. But like if you see the mosaic, you don't need to see all the pieces. Like you see the mosaic. If you focus on all the pieces, if you have, that's myopia. If you try to focus on all the pieces, you'll never see the mosaic. You got to let some of that stuff go, and it's integrated. That's actually how we learn anything. That's how we learn language. If you try to learn language systematically, it won't work. Like you build it in a way that's impossible to follow all the dots. But he was talking about this book in there at the end of it, and it was almost like it was this radical kind of comedic, I know it's a famous book because In the Name of the Rose it's a fictional work, but it's kind of like historical fiction, because at the same time there's this fictional narrative going on in this murder mystery. He's also referencing just hundreds of real historical people and real theological disputes and real books and works and things and riffing on them. And so it is this crazy kind of amalgamation and mosaic of an image. And so like I can play in the realm of the big picture. Like that's where I am all the time. But like all the detail I get lost. But there's this point in there that reminded me of that, of like the trampling down death by death piece, because it's really this upside down world where like it's almost as if those, when Jesus says like, be careful you who judge, for in your judgment you condemn yourself, for you practice the same things. But also like, I think in this weird inverted way, or with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. I don't think it's wrong to even think about the final judgment as being presided over to some level as those against whom you were judgmental in this weird upside down inversion of reality. And the freedom, this is where I'll bring in Rollins and shut up because I don't even know how to say what I'm trying to say. But one of the Rollins isms that Peter Rollins, that I like to just repeat is his psychoanalytic definition of grace, because he always compares these theological definitions with these psychoanalytic ones. And he says, grace is the freedom from the libidinal pursuit of the lack, that which will make you whole and complete. And when you stop trying to get that, whether it's in security and judgment, or control and judgment or from fear or whatever, when you stop playing that game and you're the hermeticist that no longer competes, then that's your freedom. That's the grace that actually allows you to get to the place that you're even trying to get to. But then it's almost like in this weird way of like, you don't get it until you let it go.
It's like, and it's some weird conclusion where the final judgment is the suspension of judgment, right?
Yeah, but of course it would be, because
Right,
it's a convergence of opposites, right? And
right.
that's the left and the right hand of God. Like Peugeot has been talking about
And
this
it's
stuff a
the
lot more
infinite,
explicitly
right?
recently, which I think is interesting because, not to rub it in Paul's face again, but I'll just be like, Paul, like, what are you gonna think when Peugeot starts saying all this stuff? Because
Paul, if you're listening, I'm still desirous to climb aboard the status rocket. If you want to interview me,
ooh,
I'll display my knowledge, you know, in a very impressive and pyrotechnic way. So don't
Paul
listen to
should.
what he's saying.
I'll send him
I'm
a private message about it because you should be on.
no, I'm
Here.
joking.
No,
I'm
but
gonna
you'd be
stay in my
interested in your
hole.
Hare Krishna, huh?
I said I'm joking. I'm gonna stay in my hole, and yeah, he would probably just want to talk about Hare Krishna and
Oh,
whatever.
he'd only want to talk about your upbringing for sure.
Yeah, I mean, which is interesting, but it's not as interesting as this always,
Sure it
you know.
is. And
Well,
this,
you know, it's like, well, you're right, because like the thing is that the sage sees the universe in a grain of sand. It's like
yeah,
anything can be an entry point into all the things,
well,
right?
that's that Matthew McConaughey thing when he was writing his thing, like that I love to bring up. What he said when he was talking to Jordan Peterson. Well, who was he talking to? Maybe he was talking to Peterson. I don't remember. I think so. But he said he kept trying to write his green lights, his book, and he kept trying to make it more and more general. And he said it kept applying to no one. And then he said he just leaned into making it very personal and just being really real. And he's like, the more personal he made it, the more universal it became. And I was like, hell yes, because that's how it works.
Yes.
Um, and so that's why I love what Paul has done. Actually, I would say that's why to whatever degree this little corner is a legitimate online community, and I've said this many times, it's because of that. It's because it's not about abstract ideas, it's about people. And Paul modeled that through his rando stuff. So in as much as that's why, like, even his commentary videos where he's talking about that, I follow it some and less and less. And I mean, I don't even watch a lot of them anymore, but all the people that like, even the people that get into it and comment on them and YouTube and are doing it, who are mainly just watching his commentary stuff, you're competing. You're not the hermeticist. You're playing this game of not having a face, and it's a game I have no interest in playing. So I mean, keep doing it, I guess. But like,
I mean, I'm mostly experienced in sort of playing this game against myself.
hmm,
And I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's similar to the game of like trying to know whether God is speaking to you. It's in fact, it's almost exactly the same game. And it's inarticulable, indescribable. You know, if you think, you know, it's like the Tao that can be named is not the Tao. You can't know it, but you can be it. And I mean, I kind of hate it. Like it's like it means nothing to say that one is in a, a, a communicative relationship with God when one can never know whether a thing has come from God or is what God has said, or if it isn't. Um,
but right,
like,
but if you so to lean into that though,
yeah,
like the mystical unity behind all unities, the matrix behind dualisms, is this from God or is this not from God? Yes.
right. And the answer to the prayers is given in your, it's really like, it's like the vision of God by Nicholas of Cusa, where he talks about how the gaze is just always on you wherever you go. That icon always appears to be looking at you and you only.
Yeah.
And it never stops looking at you. If it were to stop, you would stop existing.
Yes.
And the answer to your prayers, the communicated answer, is every moment of your continued existence, that you keep plowing through the waves, you know, of nothingness, you know, into being, right?
Yeah.
And and every moment is a miracle and is like the first moment of creation. it is that completely new, right?
Yeah, I think it has to be, or else you're a deist.
Right. And unless you're not in, or else you're not in God. And
Right.
here's the weird thing about classical theist metaphysics. It's like doctrine of absolute divine simplicity. It's true in this sense. It's like um in God we live and move and have our being. Yes or no? If you choose yes, then this in which you live and move and have your being, can you say anything about it? Or is it like writing on water? Is it X? Or is it both somehow X and not X? Is it the thing and its complement, the completely undifferentiated, absolutely simple, you know, infinite? Then also yes.
Yeah.
And is that well characterized as pure actuality? I would quibble on semantics and say not really, because we've already collapsed the distinction between the binary distinction between actuality and possibility. Is it like pure possibility or pure actuality? It's like yes.
Yeah.
That's what we were talking about the other day.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, something like that, right? I don't know. It's tremendous. It's yeah, and it's relentless. I mean, it's like drowning. It's like getting beaten by waves. Um, I don't know, but it couldn't be anything else. It can't be anything else. It's like, and that, like I was writing it the other day. I was just writing to myself. Let me find it. Let's see if I can.
Bring us home. Is this going to be a good note?
Yeah, it's like, okay, we say God is in control, but what would it mean for him to not be in control? Existence cannot exist without God, and non-existence cannot exist at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, and yeah, so and I mean, it non-existence does exist, but only in a sense and in a certain way. I was just saying there is no capacity, there's no possibility of this existence not not being. And
Right. Well, and this gets into, I don't, we can maybe, this is something I'd be interested in having further conversations with you and or maybe Nate, maybe just me and you, because it'd be able to explore better. But and I was talking about it a little bit this morning with Yosef. I don't know if you followed it, but he was essentially saying that God, it's the ongoing debate that Nate and I have about the univocal definition of being and whether or not
right,
God is beyond being.
right,
And Yosef would say, yes, a Jew would infer that, would say that, but he would say God is beyond being. And so it's like this, there's this weird thing in there. And the only other thing that makes me think of is James, I don't know how to say his last name. I should just
it
ask him sometime. Do you
it
know?
has to be like that. The infinite has to consist in an interplay between the infinite and the finite, and there has
Yeah.
to be univocal, there has to be univocal being. Otherwise, what's, because you say here, look, here's regular old being, and here's the being beyond being.
But there's some,
What's the matrix under them that they can be compared?
right. I don't know. There's like there's so James has been talking about, I think it's Heidegger, and he has basically postulated that like from Socrates to Nietzsche was like the end of philosophy, and he's trying to fill out this distinction between being with a Y and being with an I. And he said most modern philosophy has just concentrated on being as beings, but there's this other kind of being, and I don't know how to think about that yet, or like what it is. But it's kind of this idea of, I mean, this is really complicated. I don't even know if it's possible to be talked about, but it's essentially like the pre-eternal God, or like, and this gets into like weird logos to sarcos stuff, which I don't even really affirm. Like, I don't even know how that would be. And so there would be like, what does it mean? I don't even know how to postulate the like a question to get at it. Like, what would it mean for God to be triune outside of space and time?
No, I mean, I definitely share your instincts there. I also like feel your frustration at the inability to articulate the question. If you could frame the question, the answer would come quickly. That's usually how it is, but you don't. don't know how to frame the question.
And I don't know if that's like the distinction that Heidegger's trying to make between the Y being and the, so he has like BEYNG and BEING, which I don't know. James has been, I'll share you some of his channel stuff recently. James has been like he's been the most salient stuff to me recently. Like
James, I don't know this person.
his name's he's Greek, Kortides. How would you say that? Kortides.
Kortide. Cortides. I don't know. Cortides.
You would know how to pronounce it in Greek better
If
than
I can see it in Greek, yes. But
Oh, well, that's not the Greek. Let me see. What is it?
right.
Yeah, that's how you spell it, but I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing that's a transliteration. But anyhow, yeah. Well, this was good. I always enjoy talking with you. Everyone in this little corner is fun to talk to, and people for different reasons. But for whatever reason, we have enough overlap, but yet enough dissimilarity in the way that we were raised, in the ways that our temperaments are, in the way that we think about things, that like it always lends to like really I don't know, exciting intellectual exploring for me. So I appreciate you, Cal.
Yeah, I appreciate you too. I charge $50 per half hour. So I need you to like calculate
How
how
long
many.
are we doing it? I don't have Venmo or anything. I'll have to have my wife Venmo you.
Okay. That's all right. Well, yeah, no, the feeling is totally mutual. And I've been out of the loop too long. There's other people I need to talk to, but then again, there's a lot of stuff to do. And it's yeah, you just got to go one day at a time.
Living life.
There you go.
One more. How does Frozen 2 say it in that brilliant song? The next right step, or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. It sounds correct though. I didn't see that movie.
I loved Frozen 2. Like I think the morals that they're saying in there are just fantastic. Okay, anyhow, it's asking me to.
Is that right?
Shut up, Zoom. Shut up. I don't want to buy your program. All right.
All right.
I'm gonna stop recording.
Okay.